The morning of May 6, 2023, started with a gentle rain falling over London. Inside Kensington Palace, the Prince and Princess of Wales were already awake, preparing for one of the most significant days in British history. King Charles III would be crowned today, and their family had a special role to play in this historic ceremony. Catherine stood before the mirror in her dressing room, her stylist carefully adjusting the ivory silk crepe dress that had been chosen months ago. The Alexander McQueen gown featured delicate silver bullion and threadwork embroidery, with rose, thistle, daffodil, and shamrock motifs representing the four nations of the United Kingdom. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with each stitch telling a story of British heritage and royal tradition. William was in the adjacent room, dressed in his ceremonial robes. As the heir to the throne, he would wear the robe of state, a magnificent crimson velvet garment trimmed with ermine. The weight of the fabric reminded him of the responsibility he carried, not just for today but for the future of the monarchy. He checked his reflection one last time, thinking about his father and the journey that had brought them to this moment. Down the hallway, 9-year-old Prince George was being helped into his own ceremonial outfit. The young prince would serve as a page of honor to his grandfather, a role that filled him with both excitement and nervousness. His scarlet frock coat and gold lace trimmings made him look every bit the young royal he was destined to become. George's nanny reminded him to stand tall and remember all the practice sessions they had done. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old, was twirling in her white Alexander McQueen dress, which matched her mother's aesthetic perfectly. Her headpiece, a delicate creation by Jess Collett, featured silver bullion, crystal, and silver threadwork three-dimensional leaf embroidery. She kept asking if she could wear the pretty crown all day, making her parents smile despite the tension of the morning. 5-year-old Prince Louis was the most challenging to prepare. The youngest Cambridge child had a reputation for being spirited and unpredictable at public events. His miniature military-style uniform made him giggle, and he kept making faces at himself in the mirror. Catherine knelt down to his level, gently explaining how important today was and how proud Grandpa would be if he behaved nicely. The family gathered in the main drawing room before departure. William looked at his wife and children, feeling a surge of emotion. Catherine's composure was remarkable, her grace evident in every movement. She had transformed from a commoner into one of the most photographed and admired women in the world, yet she remained grounded and focused on what truly mattered, their family and their duty. Their convoy of cars was ready, each vehicle polished to perfection. The route to Westminster Abbey had been planned with military precision. Security was unprecedented, with thousands of police officers lining the streets. As they stepped outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Catherine took it as a good sign. George climbed into the car with his parents, repeatedly going over his duties in his mind. He had practiced walking in formation, carrying items, and maintaining perfect posture for weeks. His parents had explained that millions of people around the world would be watching, and he represented not just his family, but the future of the monarchy itself. Charlotte and Louis traveled in a separate vehicle with their nanny and other family members. Charlotte sat perfectly still, not wanting to wrinkle her dress. Louis pressed his nose against the window, waving enthusiastically at every person they passed. The nanny gently reminded him to save his energy for the actual event. As their motorcade made its way through London's streets, crowds of people waved flags and cheered. Many had camped overnight to secure the best viewing spots. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of celebration, history, and national pride. Street parties were being set up for later in the day, and the smell of traditional British cooking wafted through the air. Catherine gazed out at the sea of faces, each one hoping for a glimpse of the royal family. She thought about her own journey, from a girl growing up in Berkshire to becoming the Princess of Wales. The responsibility was immense, but she had learned to carry it with dignity. Her parents, watching from somewhere in the crowd at the Abbey, must be feeling incredibly proud. William reached over and squeezed her hand. They exchanged a look that conveyed everything: love, support, understanding, and shared purpose. They had been through so much together, weathered storms both public and private, and emerged stronger. Today was about his father, but it was also about their own future and the legacy they would leave for their children. The towers of Westminster Abbey came into view, and the children pressed closer to the windows. The ancient church, with its Gothic architecture and centuries of history, looked magnificent. Flags flew from every spire, and the bells were ringing in celebration. This was where William and Catherine had married in 2011, where countless royal ceremonies had taken place, and now, where a new king would be crowned. Inside the abbey, 2,000 guests were already seated. World leaders, foreign royalty, celebrities, and representatives from every Commonwealth nation filled the pews. The choir was warming up, their voices echoing off the stone walls. Television cameras were positioned at every angle, ready to broadcast this moment to billions of viewers worldwide. The family's cars pulled up to the entrance, and Catherine took a deep breath. She adjusted Charlotte's headpiece one final time and smoothed down Louis's collar. George stood tall beside his father, ready to fulfill his duty. The doors of Westminster Abbey stood before them, and beyond those doors history awaited. William looked at his family one more time before they stepped out. His children, dressed in their finery, represented everything he and Catherine had worked to build, a modern royal family that honored tradition while embracing the future. Catherine, elegant and poised, was his partner in every sense of the word. The car doors opened and the sound of the crowd rushed in. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. The moment had arrived. The Prince and Princess of Wales, along with their 3 children, were about to make an entrance that would be remembered for generations. They stepped out into the light, ready to take their place in one of the most important ceremonies in British history. The world held its breath, watching as this young family walked toward their destiny, each step measured and meaningful, each gesture observed and analyzed. This was more than just a coronation. It was a glimpse into the future of the British monarchy, and it began with a single, unforgettable entrance. Catherine stepped out of the car first, her ivory gown catching the light beautifully. The crowd's cheers grew louder as she emerged, and cameras clicked frantically from every direction. She smiled warmly, acknowledging the well-wishers with a graceful wave. Her every movement was elegant, years of royal training evident in the way she carried herself. William followed, offering his hand to help Charlotte out of the vehicle. The young princess looked slightly overwhelmed by the noise and attention, but her mother's reassuring presence nearby helped calm her nerves. Charlotte's white dress seemed to glow against the gray stone of the abbey, and her delicate headpiece sparkled whenever she moved. Louis emerged next, and immediately the crowd's reaction changed to one of collective delight. The youngest prince had captured the nation's heart with his previous appearances, particularly his cheeky behavior during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Today he looked around with wide eyes, taking in the grandeur of the moment. His small hand reached for Catherine's, and she held it firmly. George appeared last with his father, looking remarkably mature for his 9 years. The weight of his role as page of honor was visible in his serious expression. He had been chosen along with 7 other pages, but his position was unique. He was serving his own grandfather, the king. The red of his ceremonial coat stood out brilliantly, marking him as someone special even among royalty. The family gathered at the entrance, a picture-perfect moment that photographers would treasure. Catherine bent down to adjust Louis's outfit one more time, whispering something in his ear that made him smile. William placed a reassuring hand on George's shoulder, a gesture of fatherly support that spoke volumes about their relationship. Inside the abbey, guests turned to catch glimpses of the arriving royals. The ancient building was transformed into a spectacle of flowers, gold, and crimson fabric. The coronation chair, made in 1296, sat waiting near the high altar. The crown jewels, including the St. Edward's crown that would soon rest on King Charles's head, were displayed with reverent care. The processional route through the abbey was lined with flowers, white roses, lily of the valley, and other blooms chosen for their symbolism and beauty. The scent filled the air, mixing with the smell of old stone and burning candles. Every detail had been planned for years, every element chosen to reflect both tradition and the new king's personal vision. Catherine and William's entrance was carefully orchestrated. They would walk together with their children following in the prescribed order. Charlotte would walk with Louis, her young brother's hand in hers. George would join the other pages of honor, waiting for his moment to fulfill his ceremonial duties. The family had rehearsed this countless times, but the reality was far more overwhelming than any practice session. As they stepped through the great west door, the organ began to play. The sound was magnificent, filling every corner of the massive church. 2,000 pairs of eyes turned to watch them enter. Among the guests were President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, representing the United States. Foreign kings and queens sat in designated areas, their own crowns and tiaras glittering under the Abbey's lights. Catherine's parents, Carol and Michael Middleton, were seated with other family members. Carol's eyes filled with tears as she watched her daughter walk past, looking every inch a future queen. It seemed like only yesterday that Catherine was a little girl playing in their garden in Berkshire. Now here she was at the center of world attention, handling it all with remarkable grace. Pippa Middleton, Catherine's sister, sat nearby with her husband, James Matthews. She caught her sister's eye for a brief moment, offering a subtle smile of encouragement. The two sisters had always been close, and Pippa knew the pressure Catherine was under. Looking at her now, poised and perfect, it was hard to remember the nervous young woman who had married William 12 years ago. William's face remained serious as they walked, but those who knew him well could see the emotion in his eyes. This was his father's day, the culmination of Charles's lifelong wait to become king. The relationship between father and son had not always been smooth, but in recent years they had grown closer. William understood his father better now, especially since becoming a father himself. The music swelled as they moved deeper into the Abbey. Charlotte walked carefully, conscious of her dress and the importance of the moment. She had been told by her mother to walk slowly and look straight ahead, advice she was following perfectly. Louis, however, was beginning to show signs of restlessness. His eyes darted around, taking in the stained glass windows, the flowers, and the sea of unfamiliar faces. George had separated from his parents now, joining the other pages of honor. They stood in formation, young boys from noble families chosen for this special duty. George was the youngest among them, but his position as the king's grandson made him the most prominent. He stood straight, remembering all his training, determined to make his family proud. The royal family seats were at the front, offering a perfect view of the altar where the coronation would take place. As Catherine settled into her place, she could see Queen Camilla arriving, resplendent in her own ceremonial robes. The new queen consort looked nervous but dignified, understanding the weight of the crown she would soon receive. Prince Harry was also present, having traveled from California for the occasion. He sat separately from William and Catherine, the distance between them physical as well as emotional. The rift in the family was well documented, and despite hopes for reconciliation, the tension was palpable. Catherine caught his eye briefly, offering a polite nod, which he returned with equal formality. The Abbey continued to fill with the final arrivals. Members of Parliament, judges in their wigs and robes, military officers in dress uniform, and representatives from charities and organizations close to the king's heart. Each person added to the tapestry of this historic moment, each one playing their part in the grand ceremony. Louis was now squirming slightly in his seat. Catherine placed a gentle hand on his knee, a subtle reminder to stay still. She had brought a few small items in her clutch, a tiny toy, some mints just in case he needed distraction. Every parent in the Abbey sympathized with her situation, knowing how challenging it could be to keep a 5-year-old calm during a long ceremony. The orchestra and choir were in position, ready to perform pieces composed specifically for this coronation. Andrew Lloyd Webber had written new music, combining classical tradition with contemporary sound. The acoustics of Westminster Abbey would make every note soar, every word of the ceremony echo with significance. William sat beside Catherine, their shoulders touching slightly, a small but meaningful point of contact. They had faced many challenges together, intense media scrutiny, family dramas, and the constant pressure of public life. But they had also experienced tremendous joy, raising their children, supporting important causes, and preparing for their future roles as king and queen. As the final guests took their seats, a hush fell over the Abbey. The moment everyone had been waiting for was approaching. King Charles III would soon arrive for his coronation, and his family, particularly his son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren, would witness history being made. The entrance had been perfect, setting the stage for everything that would follow. Now the real ceremony was about to begin. The trumpets sounded, their bright notes cutting through the hushed atmosphere of Westminster Abbey. Everyone rose to their feet as King Charles III appeared at the entrance. He was accompanied by Queen Camilla, both dressed in their robes of state. The sheer magnificence of the moment took everyone's breath away, including William, who felt a surge of pride watching his father begin the sacred journey. Catherine watched as Charles processed down the aisle, his face showing a mixture of solemnity and deep emotion. This was the role he had been preparing for his entire life, through decades of waiting, through personal struggles and public criticism. Now at 74 years old, he was finally stepping into his destiny. She felt a wave of compassion for him, understanding the weight he carried. George's moment was approaching. As a page of honor, he would soon need to perform his duties, carrying part of the king's robe. Catherine could see him standing with the other pages, his face serious and concentrated. Her heart swelled with maternal pride and concern. He was so young to be thrust into such a spotlight, yet he stood there with remarkable composure. The ceremony began with ancient words spoken by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. His voice filled the abbey as he led the congregation through prayers and proclamations. The liturgy was centuries old, connecting this moment to every coronation that had come before. William listened to the familiar words, thinking about when his own turn would come, when he would stand where his father stood now. Louis was surprisingly well behaved, watching the proceedings with genuine interest. The grandeur of the ceremony, the music, the colorful robes, all of it captivated his young imagination. Catherine had worried he might become disruptive, but for now he sat quietly, occasionally whispering questions to his mother, who answered in hushed tones. Charlotte sat between her parents, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had been told this was like a fairy tale coming to life, with real kings and queens, real crowns and thrones. Every few minutes she would glance at her mother, seeking reassurance that she was doing everything correctly. Catherine would smile back, her eyes conveying love and encouragement. The recognition ceremony began, where the king was presented to the people in the four directions of the abbey. Each time, the congregation responded with shouts of "God save King Charles." The sound was powerful, reverberating off the ancient walls. William joined in the response, his voice strong and clear, publicly declaring his support and loyalty to his father. As the ceremony progressed, various items were presented to the king: the Bible, representing his duty to uphold faith; the sword, symbolizing his role as protector of the nation; the orb, representing Christ's dominion over the world. Each object was heavy with symbolism. Each one carried weight, both literal and metaphorical. Then came the moment for George to step forward. Catherine's breath caught as she watched her eldest son move with the other pages to take hold of the king's robe. His small hands gripped the crimson velvet carefully, his face showing intense concentration. William squeezed Catherine's hand, both parents sharing a moment of pure pride and anxiety. George performed his duty flawlessly, moving when required, standing still when needed. He was acutely aware of the cameras, the watching world, but he kept his focus on his task. This was his contribution to his grandfather's special day, and he was determined not to make any mistakes. The training, the practice, the preparation, it all came together in these crucial moments. The anointing of the king was the most sacred part of the ceremony. A screen was brought to shield Charles from view, maintaining the privacy of this holy moment. The archbishop anointed him with holy oil from the ampulla, oil that had been consecrated in Jerusalem. This was the moment that truly set him apart, transforming him from prince to king in the eyes of God and the church. Catherine felt the spiritual weight of the moment. Despite the pageantry and politics, there was something deeply moving about this ancient ritual. She thought about the responsibility being placed on Charles's shoulders, the promise he was making to serve his people for the rest of his life. It was a sacrifice as much as an honor. William's thoughts drifted to his own future. One day he would stand where his father stood. He would wear the crown, carry the scepter, make the same solemn vows. But that day was hopefully far in the future. For now he was content to be the supportive son, the heir preparing for his own time. The investiture followed the anointing. The king was dressed in the golden supertunica and the imperial mantle, garments of such splendor that they seemed to glow under the abbey's lights. Each piece of regalia was presented with ceremony: the glove, the ring, the bracelets. Charles received each item with reverence, understanding their symbolic importance. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The St. Edward's crown was lifted high, and the Archbishop slowly lowered it onto Charles's head. The weight of the crown, nearly 5 pounds of solid gold and precious stones, settled onto the king's head, and in that instant, the congregation erupted. "God save the king!" they shouted, the words echoing again and again. William watched his father crowned, feeling emotions he couldn't fully name. There was joy certainly, but also a strange melancholy. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, was gone. His father was now king. The natural order of succession was unfolding, bringing William one step closer to his own coronation. Time was passing, roles were changing, and nothing would ever be quite the same. Catherine noticed tears in William's eyes and took his hand again. She understood what he was feeling, the mixture of pride, sadness, and anticipation. She squeezed his hand gently, offering silent support. They were partners in everything, sharing burdens and joys alike. Louis had finally started to fidget, the long ceremony testing his young patience. Catherine quietly gave him a small toy from her bag, something to occupy his hands. He played with it discreetly, careful not to make noise. Charlotte glanced over at her little brother, relieved he was behaving reasonably well. Queen Camilla was crowned next, a smaller, more modest ceremony within the larger coronation. She received the Queen Consort's crown, a piece specially modified for the occasion. Catherine watched with interest, knowing that one day she would receive a similar crown, would kneel in this very abbey to be crowned queen. The homage followed, with William playing a crucial role. As the heir to the throne, he was first to pay homage to his father. He approached the throne, knelt before the king, and placed his hands between his father's hands. His words were clear and sincere. "I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you, and faith and truth I will bear unto you, as your liege man of life and limb. So help me God." Charles looked down at his son, and for a moment the formal mask slipped. There was pure fatherly love in the king's eyes, pride in his air, gratitude for this public display of support. William saw it and felt his own emotions rise. When Charles leaned down to kiss his son on the cheek, it was not just a ceremonial gesture, but a genuine expression of affection. Catherine watched this exchange between father and son, her own eyes growing misty. These were the moments that made history human, that reminded everyone that beneath the crowns and robes were real people with real relationships. William returned to his seat beside her, visibly moved by what had just transpired. The ceremony continued with communion, more prayers, and the final blessings. The choir sang Zadok the Priest, the same anthem that had been sung at every coronation since 1727. The music soared, powerful and triumphant, filling hearts with a sense of occasion and historical continuity. As the ceremony neared its end, Catherine looked at her children. George had completed his duties perfectly, and now sat with visible relief that his part was over. Charlotte remained attentive, still absorbed in the spectacle. Louis was tired, but had made it through without any major incidents. They had all played their parts in this historic day, and she couldn't have been prouder. The final hymn echoed through Westminster Abbey as the newly crowned King Charles III prepared to leave. The congregation remained standing, watching as he and Queen Camilla processed back down the aisle. This time they wore the robes of estate and the imperial state crown, symbols of their new status. The transformation was complete. Charles was no longer the Prince of Wales, but the King of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. William felt a strange emptiness as his father passed by. The title Prince of Wales, which had been Charles's for 64 years, now belonged to William. It was a title heavy with history and expectation, one that came with both honor and burden. Catherine, now the Princess of Wales, felt the shift too. They were no longer simply the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. Their roles had evolved, their responsibilities had grown. As the King and Queen departed, the royal family began their own exit. William and Catherine gathered their children, preparing to follow the main procession. George, finally released from his page duties, rushed to his parents' side. His face showed relief and exhaustion. The pressure of his role had been immense, but he had succeeded beyond everyone's expectations. Charlotte took her mother's hand, her earlier composure beginning to crack as fatigue set in. The ceremony had lasted nearly 2 hours, an eternity for an 8-year-old, no matter how well behaved. Catherine bent down and whispered words of praise, telling her daughter how proud she was, how beautifully she had conducted herself. Louis was ready to run. The enforced stillness of the ceremony had tested every ounce of his self-control, and now he wanted nothing more than to move, to play, to be a normal 5-year-old again. William placed a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder, a reminder that they still had more ceremonial duties ahead. The day was far from over. The family walked together toward the Abbey's exit, their footsteps echoing on the ancient stone floor. Around them, guests were beginning to file out, conversations bubbling up after the enforced silence of the ceremony. Dignitaries exchanged pleasantries. World leaders compared notes on the spectacle they had just witnessed. As they emerged from the Abbey into daylight, the roar of the crowd hit them like a wave. Thousands of people lined the streets waving flags, holding signs, cheering for the newly crowned king and his family. The rain had stopped completely, and weak sunshine broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the scene. The state coach awaited King Charles and Queen Camilla, its gilded exterior gleaming in the light. This historic carriage had carried monarchs for over 2 centuries, and now it would carry Britain's new king through the streets of London. The horses stood ready, their riders in ceremonial dress, everything orchestrated with military precision. William and Catherine would travel in a different carriage with their children, part of the grand procession that would wind through London back to Buckingham Palace. The route had been published weeks in advance, allowing people to plan where to stand, where to catch the best glimpses of the royal family. As they settled into their carriage, Louis immediately pressed his face to the window, waving enthusiastically at everyone he could see. Charlotte did the same, though with more restraint, her waves measured and proper. George sat between his parents, still processing everything that had happened, the weight of his role slowly lifting from his young shoulders. The procession began to move, horses' hooves clattering on the pavement, the crowd's cheers growing louder. Mounted cavalry rode alongside the carriages, their uniforms spotless, their bearing proud. Military bands played triumphant music, adding to the festive atmosphere. This was Britain at its ceremonial best, a display of pageantry that no other nation could quite match. Catherine watched the crowds as they passed, seeing faces from all walks of life. Elderly people who remembered previous coronations, young children experiencing their first major royal event, tourists from around the world who had traveled specifically for this moment. There were Union Jacks everywhere, a sea of red, white, and blue expressing national pride and celebration. William noticed how many people were waving specifically at their carriage, at their children. George, Charlotte, and Louis represented the future of the monarchy in a way that was tangible and hopeful. They were young, innocent, full of potential. People invested their hopes in them, dreaming of a modernized monarchy that retained tradition while embracing change. The carriage ride gave them a brief respite, a moment to decompress after the intensity of the ceremony. Catherine asked George how he felt, whether he was okay. He nodded, a small smile appearing on his face. He had done it. He had been part of history. Years from now, he would look back at this day and remember standing beside his grandfather as he became king. Charlotte was already thinking ahead to the balcony appearance. She had been told that after they reached Buckingham Palace, the family would appear on the famous balcony to greet the crowds. She had seen pictures of her great-grandmother doing this, of her grandfather, of her parents on their wedding day. Now it would be her turn. Louis was simply enjoying the ride, the attention, the celebration. He waved at people with such enthusiasm that some in the crowd laughed with delight. His energy was infectious, his joy unfiltered. In many ways, he reminded people of William at that age, cheeky, spirited, full of life. The procession continued through London streets, passing landmarks that had witnessed centuries of British history. They went by government buildings, historic churches, monuments to past glories and sorrows. Each location added layers of meaning to the journey, connecting the present moment to the long sweep of time. Inside the carriage, William reflected on the day's events. His father's coronation was, in many ways, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Charles had waited his entire life for this moment, and now that it had arrived, William found himself thinking about his own future with new clarity. He was now directly next in line for the throne, one step away from being king. Catherine noticed the thoughtful expression on her husband's rear face and understood what he was feeling. They had discussed this many times, the reality of becoming king and queen, the sacrifice of privacy, the weight of responsibility. But discussing it and living it were two different things. Today had made it all feel very real, very close. The streets grew more crowded as they approached Buckingham Palace. People had been gathering here since early morning, staking out positions near the palace gates, hoping for the best view of the balcony appearance. The atmosphere was electric, thousands of voices joining together in celebration. As the palace came into view, George sat up straighter. This was home in many ways, a place where they spent time with family, where official functions were held, where history was made. Today it would be the setting for one more historic moment, the newly crowned king greeting his subjects from the balcony. The carriages pulled through the palace gates, and the massive iron barriers closed behind them. The public part of the journey was over, at least for now. Inside the palace courtyard, staff members waited to assist, to help with the next phase of the day's events. William helped his children out of the carriage, Catherine smoothing down their clothes, making sure they still looked presentable after the long ceremony and carriage ride. Louis's hair was slightly disheveled, and she gently tried to fix it, though he squirmed away, eager to keep moving. They entered the palace through the grand entrance, walking through familiar corridors now filled with coronation guests and officials. The atmosphere was more relaxed here, people congratulating each other, sharing observations about the ceremony, decompressing after the formal proceedings. King Charles and Queen Camilla were already inside, removing their heavy robes and crowns, preparing for the balcony appearance. Charles looked tired but happy, the strain of the long ceremony evident but overshadowed by the joy of the occasion. When he saw his grandchildren, his face lit up, and he called them over for a brief moment of family connection. George, Charlotte, and Louis approached their grandfather, suddenly shy in the presence of the newly crowned king. But Charles was still grandpa to them, and he knelt down to their level, thanking George specifically for his perfect performance as page of honor. The young prince beamed with pride, his grandfather's approval meaning everything to him. The family was given a few minutes to prepare for the balcony appearance. Catherine checked her appearance in a mirror, ensuring her dress was still perfect, her hair in place. William stood beside her, and for a moment, they were just a married couple, sharing a quiet moment before stepping back into the public eye. The doors to the famous balcony were just ahead. Through the windows, William could see the massive crowd gathered in front of Buckingham Palace. The mall stretched out before them, a river of people and flags flowing toward the palace gates. The sight was overwhelming, even for someone who had spent his entire life in the public eye. Catherine could hear the crowd's roar even through the thick palace walls. The anticipation was building, people waiting to see their new king, to celebrate this historic moment. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. In moments, they would step onto that balcony and the world would be watching. Every expression, every gesture would be photographed, analyzed, discussed. Louis was bouncing with excitement, unable to contain his energy any longer. The prospect of waving to thousands of people thrilled him. Charlotte reminded him to be good, channeling her mother's gentle authority. George stood quietly, still feeling the weight of the day's responsibilities, not quite ready to relax completely. Palace officials were coordinating the balcony appearance, determining who would stand where, how long they would remain outside, the precise timing of everything. This was choreographed as carefully as the coronation itself. Nothing was left to chance when it came to royal protocol. King Charles emerged, still wearing the imperial state crown, though he had changed into different robes, lighter, more suitable for a balcony appearance. Queen Camilla was beside him, also crowned, her face showing the relief of someone who had successfully navigated an enormous challenge. They were ready to greet their people as king and queen, the family assembled in the proper order. Charles and Camilla would be central, flanked by working members of the royal family. William and Catherine would stand close to the king, their position reflecting their status as heir and future queen. The children would be arranged carefully, ensuring they could see over the balcony's edge. A palace aide gave the signal. The doors swung open and the sound of the crowd exploded into the room. It was deafening, joyful, a collective expression of celebration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. Charles stepped out first, and the cheering somehow grew even louder. The king and queen moved to the center of the balcony, waving to the crowds below. Flags waved frantically in response, and the chant of "God Save the King" rose from thousands of throats. Charles looked moved, his hand raised in acknowledgement, his face showing genuine emotion at this reception. William and Catherine stepped out next, the children following close behind. The crowd's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. The Prince and Princess of Wales were beloved figures, and their children were sources of endless fascination and affection. Cameras focused on them, capturing every moment for posterity. Louis immediately began waving with both hands, his enthusiasm drawing smiles from everyone who could see him. Charlotte waved more carefully, remembering her mother's instructions about being graceful. George stood between his parents, his wave measured and mature, still very conscious of his role. The family spread out along the balcony, each finding their position. Catherine stood close to the edge, ensuring her children could see and be seen. William was beside her, one hand resting protectively on George's shoulder. The view before them was breathtaking, hundreds of thousands of people stretching as far as the eye could see. The mall was a carpet of humanity, every inch occupied by someone wanting to be part of this historic day. Red, white, and blue dominated the scene, flags of all sizes waving in the breeze. Some people had climbed trees for a better view, others perched on monuments, all united in their desire to witness this moment. Louis leaned forward, fascinated by the sheer number of people below. Catherine gently pulled him back, mindful of safety but also of how such images would appear in photographs. Every movement on this balcony would be scrutinized, replayed, analyzed. The pressure was constant even in moments of celebration. Charlotte stood on her tiptoes, trying to see everything. The crowd seemed to go on forever, a sea of faces all looking up at them. She felt special and overwhelmed all at once. Her mother had told her that being royal meant serving people, and here were the people they served, gathered to celebrate their family. King Charles raised both hands in a grand gesture of acknowledgement, and the crowd responded with renewed cheering. This was his moment, the culmination of a lifetime of preparation and waiting. At 74, he was Britain's oldest monarch at accession, but his energy and commitment were evident in every gesture. The Royal Air Force flypast was scheduled to occur soon, weather permitting. The earlier rain had caused some concern, but the clouds were breaking up, revealing patches of blue sky. If all went according to plan, the Red Arrows and other aircraft would stream overhead in a spectacular display. William glanced at his father, seeing him in this new role, crowned and celebrated. The relationship between them had evolved over the years through difficult times and better ones. Today represented a new chapter in that relationship, Charles as king, William as heir, both understanding their roles in the monarchy's continuation. Catherine watched the crowd, seeing elderly veterans with their medals, young families with children on shoulders, people who had camped out overnight just to be part of this moment. The connection between the monarchy and the people was tangible here, real and meaningful in ways that went beyond politics or protocol. A distant sound grew louder, the roar of aircraft engines. The flypast was beginning. Everyone on the balcony looked up, and the crowd below did the same. First came the historic aircraft, Spitfires and Hurricanes from World War II, flying in formation, a tribute to Britain's past. Louis pointed excitedly at the planes, his young voice lost in the noise of engines and crowd. Charlotte clasped her hands together in delight, the aerial display thrilling her. George watched with more measured interest, aware that he needed to maintain composure, but still clearly impressed by the spectacle. Modern military aircraft followed, Typhoons, transport planes, helicopters, each representing different branches of the Royal Air Force. The precision of their formation was remarkable, the result of weeks of practice and military discipline. The crowd cheered for each group of aircraft, pride in the armed forces evident. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The Red Arrows appeared on the horizon, 9 red aircraft in perfect formation. As they approached the palace, they released their signature red, white, and blue smoke trails, painting the sky in the colors of the Union Jack. The balcony erupted in smiles. Charles looked delighted, pointing up at the display. William and Catherine shared a moment of wonder, both of them moved by the beauty of the scene. The children were transfixed, watching as the colored smoke streaked across the sky above them. Louis jumped up and down, his excitement uncontrollable. Charlotte stood with her mouth open in awe. George allowed himself to smile broadly, the formality of the day momentarily forgotten in the face of such magnificence. These were the moments they would remember, the pure joy cutting through all the ceremony and protocol. The red arrows completed their pass and disappeared into the distance, leaving trails of colored smoke slowly dissipating in the breeze. The crowd's cheering reached a crescendo, a final outpouring of celebration and national pride. This was Britain at its finest. Tradition and modernity, history and hope, all combined in one spectacular moment. King Charles turned to his family, his face radiant with happiness. He reached out and pulled William close, then beckoned for the grandchildren. For a moment the formal poses were abandoned, and they were simply a family sharing an extraordinary experience. Catherine captured the moment in her memory, knowing it would be treasured forever. The time on the balcony was drawing to a close. Protocol dictated how long they should remain visible, balancing the public's desire to see them with the need for privacy and rest. Palace officials were making subtle signals that it was time to withdraw. The family lined up for a final wave. Charles and Camilla at the center, William and Catherine with their children nearby, all of them acknowledging the crowd one last time. The people below responded with enthusiasm, knowing this balcony appearance was ending but grateful for what they had witnessed. Louis gave one more enthusiastic wave, making people in the crowd laugh and wave back even more energetically. Charlotte waved gracefully, a princess in every gesture. George's wave was dignified, befitting his role and his future. Catherine and William waved together, a united front, partners in everything. As they turned to go back inside, Catherine took one last look at the massive crowd. These were the people her children would one day serve, the nation they were being raised to lead. The responsibility was enormous, but moments like this reminded her why it mattered, why the monarchy still held meaning for millions. The doors closed behind them, shutting out the noise of the crowd. Inside the palace, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The public performance was over and they could finally relax. Louis immediately slumped against his mother, exhausted by the day's excitement and his efforts to behave. Charlotte took off her headpiece with relief, her head probably aching from its weight. George loosened his collar, the formality of his outfit suddenly feeling restrictive. William removed his ceremonial robes, grateful to be in lighter clothing. Catherine kicked off her heels, her feet sore from hours of standing. King Charles removed his crown, placing it carefully on a nearby cushion. The weight of it, both physical and symbolic, had been considerable, and relief showed on his face as it was lifted. Queen Camilla did the same, the two of them finally able to be themselves again away from the watching world. The family gathered in one of the palace's private rooms, away from the crowds of guests and officials. This was their moment, a brief respite before the evening celebrations. Food and drinks were provided, and the children fell upon the refreshments with the appetite of youth. William sat beside his father, and for a few minutes they talked quietly. Charles expressed his gratitude for William's support, for his homage during the ceremony, for the perfect behavior of the grandchildren. William assured his father that they were all proud, all committed to supporting him in this new chapter. Catherine found herself sitting with Queen Camilla, the two women who had married into this extraordinary family. They shared observations about the day, the relief that everything had gone smoothly, the exhaustion that came from such intense public scrutiny. A bond of understanding passed between them, recognizing the unique challenges they both faced. The evening was approaching, and with it came a different kind of celebration. Street parties were happening across the United Kingdom, communities coming together to mark the coronation. In London alone, thousands of parties were registered, neighbors gathering to share food, music, and the joy of the occasion. At Buckingham Palace, preparations were underway for a more formal celebration. A state banquet would be held later, but first the family had a few hours to themselves. Catherine took the children to change into more comfortable clothes, knowing they needed rest before any evening activities. George collapsed onto a sofa in their private quarters, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with him. He had carried the weight of his responsibilities with remarkable maturity, but he was still just a 9-year-old boy who had been through an incredibly intense experience. Catherine sat beside him, stroking his hair, telling him again how proud she was. Charlotte was already talking about the day, processing everything she had seen and experienced. She asked questions about the crown, the ceremony, why certain things happened in certain ways. William answered patiently, impressed by her curiosity and intelligence. She was growing up so fast, becoming more aware of her role and what it meant. Louis had fallen asleep almost immediately after changing clothes. The excitement and effort of behaving had completely drained him. Catherine looked at her youngest child sleeping peacefully and smiled. He had done so well, better than anyone had dared hope. His personality was strong and vibrant, and learning to channel that energy appropriately would be an ongoing journey. William stood at the window, looking out over the palace gardens toward London beyond. The city was celebrating, lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. Somewhere out there, millions of people were marking this day, and he felt the weight of their expectations, their hopes for the future. Catherine joined him at the window, slipping her hand into his. They stood together in comfortable silence, both reflecting on the day's events. The coronation had been magnificent, a perfect blend of ancient tradition and contemporary relevance. But more than that, it had been a family milestone, a moment that bound them all together. William thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had passed away just months earlier. She would have loved this day, would have been proud of how it had all unfolded. Her absence was felt keenly, particularly in these moments of royal celebration, but her legacy lived on, in the institution she had served for 70 years and the family she had guided and shaped. Catherine understood his thoughts without words being spoken. The Queen had been a remarkable woman, a source of strength and wisdom. Catherine had learned so much from her, about duty, about grace under pressure, about balancing public service with private happiness. Those lessons would guide her as she stepped into her own expanding role. A knock at the door brought them back to the present. A staff member informed them that King Charles was requesting their presence for a private family gathering before the evening's formal events. William and Catherine roused their children, helping them prepare for this more intimate celebration. They made their way through the palace corridors to the king's private apartments. Other family members were arriving as well. Princess Anne with her family, Prince Edward and Sophie, and a few other close relatives. This was family time, away from officials and protocol, a chance to simply be together. Charles greeted each person warmly, his earlier formality replaced by genuine affection. When William's family entered, he immediately gathered the children close, thanking them again for their participation in the ceremony. George received special praise, his grandfather recognizing the courage it took for such a young boy to perform so publicly. The gathering was relaxed. Champagne for the adults, special drinks for the children. Conversations flowed easily, people sharing their perspectives on the day, laughing about small mishaps that had occurred behind the scenes, marveling at how smoothly everything had ultimately gone. Catherine found herself in conversation with Princess Anne, discussing the children and the challenges of raising them in the royal spotlight. Anne, who had raised her own children with as much normalcy as possible, offered insights and encouragement. The bond between royal women, those who understood the unique pressures of this life, was strong and supportive. William talked with his father about the ceremony's meaning, about the changes Charles hoped to bring to the monarchy. The new king spoke of his desire to make the institution more relevant to modern Britain, to connect with younger generations while respecting tradition. William listened carefully, understanding that his father's reign would shape the monarchy he would eventually inherit. George, Charlotte, and Louis played with their cousins. The formality of the day finally completely lifted. Their laughter filled the room, a reminder of life's continuity, of the future generations who would carry the family forward. Charles watched his grandchildren with visible joy, seeing in them the monarchy's future. As the evening progressed, the family moved to a formal dining room for a more structured meal. The state banquet would happen later, but this dinner was just for family, an opportunity to celebrate together before the public festivities resumed. The table was set beautifully, but the atmosphere remained warm and intimate. During dinner, Charles stood to make a toast. He thanked his family for their support, particularly William and Catherine for their dedication and for raising 3 wonderful children. He spoke of the future with optimism, of his commitment to service and of his pride in the family gathered around him. There were tears in several eyes as he finished speaking, William responded with his own toast, pledging his loyalty and support to his father as king. He spoke of the monarchy's importance, of its ability to unite people and provide continuity in changing times. His words were heartfelt, reflecting both personal love and professional commitment. Catherine watched him with pride, seeing the future king in his bearing and words. The meal continued with easier conversation, family stories being shared, memories of the Queen being fondly recalled. Charlotte asked questions about previous coronations. Fascinated by the history of it all, Charles patiently explained, passing on knowledge and traditions to the next generation. As dinner concluded, the time for the state banquet was approaching. The family would need to prepare once again, to put on their formal faces for the world. But these hours together had been precious, a reminder of what truly mattered beneath all the ceremony and protocol. Catherine took her children back to prepare them for the evening's final events. George would attend the state banquet, deemed old enough to participate. Charlotte and Louis would return to their quarters with their nanny, their day's duties complete. Both younger children accepted this with good grace, exhausted from the long day. As Catherine tucked Louis into bed, he asked if Grandpa was really a king now. She confirmed that yes, Grandpa was king, and that meant their family had special responsibilities to help him and to serve their country. Louis thought about this seriously for a moment, then asked if that meant he had to be good all the time. Catherine laughed and kissed his forehead, assuring him he just needed to try his best. Charlotte was still awake when Catherine came to say goodnight. The young princess had so many thoughts about the day, so many questions about the future. Catherine sat with her, answering what she could, helping her process the enormity of what they had experienced. She reminded Charlotte that while their life was unusual, they were still a normal family who loved each other. William was helping George prepare for the banquet, showing him how to wear the formal attire correctly. Father and son stood side by side before a mirror, and William was struck by how much George was growing, how much he already resembled the portraits of past princes. The weight of legacy hung heavy in that moment. George asked his father if being king was hard. William considered the question carefully before answering honestly that yes, it was difficult, but it was also an honor and a privilege to serve. He explained that they were born into this role, and while it came with challenges, it also provided opportunities to do good, to help people, to make a difference. The state banquet was a glittering affair, held in the palace's grand ballroom. Hundreds of guests were in attendance, foreign dignitaries, government officials, representatives from the Commonwealth, and other important figures. The room sparkled with crystal, silver, and the jewels worn by guests. William and Catherine made their entrance with George between them. The young prince carried himself well, though his nervousness was evident to those who knew him. Catherine kept a supportive hand on his shoulder, guiding him through the unfamiliar social landscape. King Charles and Queen Camilla presided over the banquet. The newly crowned monarchs at the height of their ceremonial powers. Speeches were made, toasts were offered, the finest food and wine were served. It was diplomacy and celebration combined, soft power exercised through hospitality and tradition. Throughout the evening, William and Catherine worked the room, speaking with various guests representing the future of the monarchy. They were poised and graceful, years of training evident in every interaction. George stayed close to his parents, observing, learning, beginning to understand the complex social dynamics of royal life. As midnight approached, the banquet began to wind down. Guests departed with expressions of congratulations and goodwill. The coronation day was officially ending, though celebrations would continue across the country into the next day and beyond. The family finally retreated to their private quarters, exhausted but satisfied. It had been a day of triumph, a day that would be remembered in history books, a day that marked the beginning of a new era for the British monarchy. William and Catherine stood together one last time at the window, looking out over London. The city was still awake, still celebrating. Fireworks erupted in the distance, unofficial displays marking the coronation. The glow of street parties could be seen across the capital. Catherine leaned against William, feeling the weight of the day in her bones. They had made it through, their children had been perfect, the ceremony had been magnificent. But more than that, they had shown the world a modern royal family, loving, united, committed to service. William held his wife close, thinking about the future. His father was king now, beginning his reign with hope and purpose. But one day the crown would pass to William, and Catherine would stand beside him as queen. Their children would take on even greater responsibilities. The cycle would continue as it had for centuries. For now, though, they were simply a family at the end of an extraordinary day. 3 children sleeping peacefully, parents reflecting on what had been accomplished, a grandfather settling into his new role. The coronation was complete, but the real work of the reign was just beginning. As they finally prepared for bed, Catherine thought about the entrance they had made that morning. The careful preparation, the nervous energy, the weight of expectation. They had dazzled the nation and the world, not through flash or spectacle alone, but through dignity, grace, and genuine connection. The royal entrance had indeed been like no other, and the memory of this day would shine brightly in the crown's long history. William, Kate, and their children had taken their place in that history, playing their parts perfectly, showing the monarchy's enduring relevance and its bright future. As sleep finally claimed them, London continued to celebrate outside, the joy of Coronation Day extending into the night, marking the dawn of a new chapter for Britain and its royal family.